So good afternoon to all of you. When we talk about modern India, so in modern India, there are various aspects from where UPSC is going to ask questions. So सबकी थोड़ी ठीक understanding बनाना जरूरी है. Okay, we'll start with the first topic. The first topic is about the arrival of the European companies. Let me give you a brief overview of modern India first. So the European companies, the first one was the Portuguese. After that we have the arrival of Dutch, then comes English, then in between we have Danish, but they are not that much important because they majorly invested their time in the which activities? Religious activities or the conversion into Christianity. And the last one to come were French. The main battle it's going to be between British versus French. Okay, so this is our first topic. Okay, in which we'll discuss about these European companies, and the major area from where UPSC asks question is the Carnatic Wars. Okay, we'll compare both the major companies, British as well as the French. क्या किसके positives है, क्या negatives था, and who were the important heroes for the British, like Robert Clive, who were responsible for the creation of empire. Okay, during the later time we'll also discuss the historiography. All of you know that there is a very big debate that India was conquered unconsciously, कि भाई हम तो मौज मस्ती में ही कब्जा करके बैठ गए, हमें पता ही नहीं चला. Okay, and these kinds of opinions we have to evaluate to what extent they are correct or incorrect. So we'll discuss about that in the later times. अभी starting में हमारा बस focus होगा on these companies. The second part, after this, we'll discuss about the native states of India. Okay, the prominent native states, which includes the most important state was Bengal. Okay, this is also one of the reasons why British were able to conquer India and French could not, because the resources of Bengal would help them in doing so. All right, so we'll talk about Bengal. Then we'll talk about the other major powers like Marathas. Along with Marathas, we also have Mysore. Okay, and finally the last remaining major state, that was Punjab. Okay, so these are the major states which we are going to discuss. All right, then after that our focus will change towards the establishment of early structure. The early structure of the administration, because whenever you want to rule someone, administration to create करना पड़ेगा, and in that administration what are the important elements of that? We'll discuss about the creation of the office of Governor General. We'll talk about the various acts, okay, starting from the regulating act and how the important acts became the part of Indian administration and structure, the creation of civil service. Okay, all the basic foundation. We'll talk about even the initial revenue settlements, the overall progress towards the permanent settlement that will happen in 1793. So all these will become the early structure. Within this we will talk about the police structure, judiciary, all this. This became the early structure. And then we'll read about the specific policies of the British. Okay, so when we're starting with modern India, तो आपका जो freedom struggle है, that is only 30 to 35% of the syllabus. उसके अलावा भी बहुत सारा syllabus है, and we'll start with this. And in the last part, we'll discuss about the consolidation as a nation after independence in 1947. Okay, 1857 से लेके 1947 का जो phase है, that we'll do in very detail, because this is where the majority of the questions are going to be from 57 to 1947. But this is the initial part in which we have to build up the basic understanding of modern India. So today let us start with Portuguese. Okay, initially आप बस PPT में focus करो, handout will be taking on later on. Let us see what all we need to understand. So in this today's session, we'll talk about the background, the overall chronology which we have just discussed also, the important travelers, and finally the important events. These are the four important part of the first topic. So why Europeans wanted to come towards India? That had some factors. And what are those factors? We have to understand them. The first important factor is the overtaking of Constantinople in 1453 by the Turks. This is roughly the area of Istanbul. Okay, and this was the important area which was responsible for the trade. All right. So once Constantinople it went under Turks, now all these Europeans they wanted to come with a direct route to India. Why? What's the reason for that? Why they want direct route? Because the Turks started various kinds of levies, है ना, percentage of taxation बढ़ा दिया. If you want to trade through our territory, you have to pay custom duties. You have to pay miscellaneous other charges also. So that's why it became pertinent for the Europeans to find a direct way to India. Second, this is the age of Renaissance. Renaissance is known as the rebirth or the revival of the Roman culture. Okay, and there were two important outcomes of this Renaissance. One was the discovery of man. Okay, where they were trying to find out what are the important elements of being a human. उन्हीं की वजह से हमारी सारी terms derive होती हैं. What is humanity? All those terms. That is an outcome of Renaissance. And the second part was exploration. What they wanted to have a better understanding of the world. And if you want better understanding of the world, what should be done? You should travel more. Okay, you have to create an overall map of the world. Okay, and this age of exploration, we see Columbus wanted to come to India, but कहाँ चले गए? America. Similarly, Bartholomew Diaz, he was one of the earliest person who wanted to try for the direct route to India, but he could come only up to South Africa, and then he went back. And finally, Vasco da Gama, he became successful in coming towards India. So this is the age of exploration, which was the direct outcome of Renaissance. And let's see further factors. Demand of Oriental goods. So there was a categorical demand of the Indian goods in those areas. And if they want to have specific availability of these goods at a price which could be afforded by people, they have to come direct. Otherwise, the Turks, they were levying various kinds of duties. Finally, technological advancement. Without technological advancement, can you come towards India? No, it's a very big, है ना, पूरा ocean आपको cover करते करते आना है. From all the way from Atlantic Ocean, you have to enter Indian Ocean, and then only you can touch India. So the technological advantages like the use of compass, that makes it easy for you to follow the directions. Similarly, gunpowder, because of the piracy. सोमालिया के आसपास में हर कोई कैप्टन जैक स्पैरो है, ठीक है. So if you want to come towards India, you require security. So use of gunpowder, that became important for the ships, as well as cartography system. Without having definite maps, आप किधर जा रहे हो, क्या कर रहे हो, पता भी नहीं चलेगा. Okay, so those were the times when these things were luxury. कि इतनी बड़ी चीज आ गई. अब तो हम सब गूगल मैप लेके घूमते रहते हैं इधर से उधर. इवन तो गूगल मैप आपको 4 बार घुमाता है, फिर रास्ता बताएगा फाइनली. हाँ, समझ में आया तो अगली बार याद रखना, है ना, मेरे भरोसे नहीं चलना है. But these people were doing this for the first time. They were using these things to find out different nations. All right. So this became important. And finally, the zeal to promote Christianity, religious conversions. Okay, all these were the factors why they wanted to come towards India. ठीक है, ये factors याद रखना. Even though from this topic the questions are only from the Carnatic Wars, but for the sake of understanding, remember these factors. कभी 10 mark में आ गया तो easily आप points लिख पाओगे. Is it clear to all of you? Similar things are in the handouts. We'll discuss that later on. थोड़ा और डिटेल में बात करेंगे कि कौन किसमें कैसे involved था. What are the important events? Okay, with respect to that. So I hope these factors are clear to everyone. तो एक आसान सा क्वेश्चन लिखते हैं. चलो, let us start with the answer writing also. Evaluate the factors responsible for European direct trade with India in 15th century. Could be a 10 marker question. What are the various factors which were responsible for European interest in direct trade with India in 15th and 16th century? It would be like that. Okay, it would be a 10 marker. Good afternoon, all the online students. Yes, Shivam, you're correct. Levies, supply disruption, all those things happened along with that. The question में जो key term है that is evaluate. Evaluate means you have to assign a priority. Which factor was more important than the others? थोड़ा सा सोच के समझ के इसको आंसर लिखना. ठीक है, फैक्टर्स तो हमने समझ लिए. Now you have to see कि किसकी सबसे ज़्यादा प्रायोरिटी रहेगी. The second thing, you can divide these factors along different dimension: political, economic, social, cultural, technological. अपने हैंडआउट पे देखो ऐसे डिवाइड किया हुआ है like that. तो इवेल्युएट जब भी आएगा फैक्टर तो आपको देखना है कौन सा फैक्टर कितना इंपॉर्टेंट है. विच वाज द मोस्ट प्रेसिंग फैक्टर रिस्पॉन्सिबल फॉर दैट. सो मोस्ट प्रेसिंग फैक्टर कौन सा था? ऑक्यूपेशन बाय द टर्क्स ऑफ कॉन्स्टेंटिनोपल. नाउ दे वर लेफ्ट विद नो अदर अल्टरनेटिव, गो फॉर फाइंड फॉर अदर थिंग्स. बट द डेवलपमेंट इन अदर एरियाज ऑल्सो सपोर्टेड द यूरोपियन इंटरेस्ट टुवर्ड्स इंडिया. तो इसको डिवाइड उसी तरीके से करना जैसे आपका हैंडआउट में दिया हुआ है. दैट्स हाउ यू हैव टू राइट. इंट्रोडक्शन क्या लिखेंगे हम? व्हाट वुड बी द इंट्रोडक्शन? ये तीन वर्ड याद कर लेना. व्हाट आर द थ्री इंपॉर्टेंट summation of the European interest? Gold, glory and gold. These were the three prominent interests, okay, which drove their interest towards India in 15th and 16th century. लास्ट वीक जो 2-3 सेशंस थे एक बार उसको जरूर देख लेना टाइम निकाल के, जिन्होंने नहीं देखा होगा. द मोस्ट इंपॉर्टेंट इज वन विद रिस्पेक्ट टू कीवर्ड्स, व्हाट ऑल शुड बी रिटन इन द आंसर, एंड सेकंड हाउ टू रीड द बुक्स. दैट वाज अ वेरी इंपॉर्टेंट सेशन. अगर उसको ठीक से समझ लोगे तो यू कैन बिकम वन ऑफ द टॉपर. ओके, स्कैन करना आना चाहिए, चाहे अब जब भी आप जनरल स्टडीज़ पढ़ रहे हो या फिर हिस्ट्री ऑप्शन पढ़ रहे हो, यू शुड नो हाउ टू स्कैन ए बुक वेरी क्विकली. तो वो सारी स्ट्रेटजीज मैंने डिस्कस की थी उसके अंदर कि क्या जनरल इन्फॉर्मेशन होती है जो बार बार रिपीट होती है. तो उसको आपको ज़्यादा याद करके फ़ायदा नहीं होगा. स्पेसिफिक इन्फॉर्मेशन, हाउ मच ऑफ द फैक्ट्स डेटा इज रिक्वायर्ड while राइटिंग आंसर्स, how the various questions can be found by the UPSC from your standard books, ऑल दोज एस्पेक्ट्स वर डिस्कस। तो एक बार उसको जरूर देख लेना अगर नहीं देखा है, ठीक है। 3 क्लास हुआ था, तीनों एक बार देख सकते हो, ठीक है। इट विल ऐड टू योर नॉलेज कि हाउ टू डू सम स्पेसिफिक थिंग्स, ठीक है। कैन डिस्कस, फिनिश या बचा है? 5 मिनट और ले लो, जल्दी से फिनिश करो उसको। The question is evaluate the factor responsible for European interest in direct trade with India in 15th century. So I think in introduction it is very easy. क्या लिखना है introduction में? Okay. In introduction लिखना है कैसे चाहिए? What are the key component of an introduction? We will discuss the context, है ना? क्या क्या specific context है हमारे यहाँ पे? So here the context is all about why this interest in direct trade with India, and this came because of two prominent factors. Okay, So most important factor was the occupation of Constantinople, and the second, the rise of Renaissance, okay, or revival of ancient Roman culture. These two factors pushed towards direct trade with India. So the same you can write in your introduction. This could be about the context, the broader context, why they came. Second, you can directly talk about the interest also. Right? Gold, glory, and gold. Okay, these were the three prominent factors which.
Introduction to 15th century being the age of Renaissance intrigued the Europeans to find alternative way towards India.
सिर्फ एक फैक्टर से काम नहीं चलेगा, या तो आप ये तीनों इंटरेस्ट को साथ में लिख दो, ठीक है. Renaissance, yes, Renaissance was important, but this was not the only factor which was responsible for it. Or the rise of Turks, okay, accompanied with, okay, the second issue of gold, glory, and gold were responsible for direct routes towards India. Okay.
By Turks in 1453, Europeans were given with high duties and taxes to trade with India, and the gold, glory, and gold factor affected Europeans towards India.
ठीक है, लिख सकते हो. ठीक है. Okay, so in introduction, mostly about 2-3 things. You can write with context. You can even focus only on timeline also. Okay, timeline में हम क्या करेंगे? Major focus will be on the review history of those time period. At 15th and 16th century, they mark the era of Renaissance in European history, and this new spirit also paved the way for their direct trade with India. So here we are majorly focusing on the timeline of European history, the 15th and 16th century. That came in. Okay, or you can go further in the context that 14th and 15th century, this was the age of exploration. This was the age of exploration in which important personalities like Columbus, Vasco da Gama, they were trying to find, or they were trying to create a map of the world. And the direct trade with India was fueled by one of the factors like the occupation of Turks of Constantinople during the same period. So introductions can be of wide variety. आप जैसे चाहो वैसे लिख सकते हो. There is not a problem with respect to that. Okay, so कोई भी एक approach use करो, उसको लिख दो. The second part is evaluating the factors. So we have to evaluate the factors. What dimensions of factors were responsible for that? So when we talk about these factors could be political. So first part would be dividing them. Okay, it could be economic, social, there can be technological factors, there can be religious factors. The first part of the evaluation, you have to divide the factors into different categories, and the second, you have to assign priority. Which factor was the most important factors? Like if we see in this case, the most important factor was the occupation of Constantinople. It could be in the form of political, okay, which was having a direct bearing on the trade. All right, so it was leading to the economic interest of the Europeans were now at a disadvantage because of the changed political equations. So this has a direct bearing on this. Okay, along with this, because of Renaissance or the social phenomena, we see the rise of technological emperors, ना कि यहाँ से टेक्नोलॉजी इंप्रूव होना शुरू हो गया of the Europeans, which eventually was also supported by the religion or the promotion of Christianity. तो factors को आपको divide करना है and you have to assign a significant priority. You have to show the thought process also. यानी कौन सा factor ने main काम था origin में, so the origin can be assigned to the political factors. That's why they were now in search of direct trade routes. Okay, and then the other factors. So you have to assign a priority to them. And finally, when we come to conclusion, तो अगर आपने वास्को डे गामा को इंट्रोडक्शन में नहीं लिखा है तो उसको कंक्लूजन में यूज कर सकते हो. ठीक है कि दिस स्पिरिट okay was embodied by Vasco da Gama, who was able to reach Calicut by 1498, and this was the modern combination of the Europe and India, which eventually increased the scale of trade as well as colonial ambitions or the imperialistic ambitions of the European power in the coming centuries. ठीक है, so that could be your conclusion. ठीक है, तो आंसर राइटिंग पे एफर्ट डालना फिर से शुरू करो. In modern India, maximum diversity of answer writing is there because the topics are varied. हर तरीके का आपको टॉपिक मिलने वाला है और हर किसी की आंसर राइटिंग अप्रोच थोड़ी सी डिफरेंट होगी. Like here we can see the answer writing approach is mostly with respect to the European history. Then it will be about the rivalries of the British and the French. Then question will come on your native states. तो वहाँ पे थोड़ा सा और शिफ्ट करना पड़ेगा. तो डिफरेंट सेक्टर्स में आपको आंसर राइटिंग को इम्प्रूव करना पड़ेगा बिकॉज मॉडर्न इंडिया इज द मोस्ट चैलेंजिंग पार्ट ऑफ हिस्ट्री ऑप्शनल इन टर्म्स ऑफ सिलेबस, इन टर्म्स ऑफ द वैरायटी ऑफ क्वेश्चंस विच यूपीएससी आस्क एवरी ईयर. कभी सोशल इश्यूज पे क्वेश्चन आता है, कभी इकोनॉमिक इश्यूज पे क्वेश्चन आता है, कभी आपका क्वेश्चन पोस्ट इंडिपेंडेंस आएगा. तो हर किसी की थोड़ी सी अप्रोच आपको डिफरेंट करनी पड़ेगी एंड विल डिस्कस अबाउट दैट वन आफ्टर द अदर. ओके, सो इज इट क्लियर द फर्स्ट पार्ट? इज दिस क्लियर टू एवरीवन नाउ? Okay, we have written an answer also, so I think it will be more clear now. Okay, so I think this timeline is known to majority of you. The Portuguese, they were the one to come first, 1498, and then established one of their settlement by 1500. Then the Dutch, 1600. By 1605, they were able to establish themselves at Masulipatam. Then come the British. Okay, they were able to establish themselves by 1613 at Surat. Danes, they were majorly involved in the religious activities. And the major area was Tranquebar, and later on it will become Serampore in near the Calcutta. And finally comes the French by 1664, and they were able to establish themselves by 1668. So these are the various European companies which came in this order. And kindly remember this for your prelims exam. In prelims exam, they keep on asking such questions. Okay, Portuguese, they were the first one to come and the last one to leave. सबसे लास्ट में गए थे जूते पड़ने के बाद. Okay, that happened in 1961. है ना, when Goa, Daman, Diu, all these were integrated. All right. So let us start with the Portuguese. The first famous personality is Vasco da Gama. All right. So he came at the port of Calicut. The exact time was of 21 May 1498. He was received by the local ruler whose title was Zamarin. And this specific trip was highly profitable to him. So they were able to get around 60 times the cost of the expedition. Okay, so they realized this is very profitable, and in the second trip he again came by 1502. All right, we discuss about the various policies which they will follow. Similarly, we see the arrival of Pedro Alvarez, okay, and they were able to create trading stations at Calicut, Cananor, and finally at Cochin. So these were the initial parts of India which were influenced by the Portuguese. After Vasco da Gama, then we see the sequence of important governors which were appointed by the Portuguese. Okay, so the first one was Francis de Almeida. So he was the first one to be appointed, and he was in direct opposition to Zamarin. He had one specific demand, कि expel all the other people. ठीक है ना, expel all the other people, and the foreign trade should be a monopoly of the Portuguese, and this was not accepted by Zamarin. That's why the conflict started. Okay, then Gujarat and Egyptian navies, now they were against Portuguese. Reason being, Portuguese wanted to monopolize the trade. We have discussed the Carta system in medieval. Okay, so in Carta system, so what was this Carta system? So this system was brought in by the Portuguese. Under this, if you want to trade, you have to take permit. It was a kind of pass. अगर आपने ये pass नहीं लिया, if you have not taken this permit from the Portuguese, so what were the options which were available to them? They could eventually sink their ship. Okay, the whole goods, it can be considered as contraband. Contraband means illegal trade. It could be considered, or even all the crew members, people, they could be made prisoners of war. Okay, so this was the Carta system which was started by the Portuguese. All right, and this was further helped by creation of various forts. Under this system, they forced majority of the ships to go along the Indian coast so that they can pay taxes. This is what the Carta system was all about. Within Carta system, some of the goods, they were considered as Portuguese monopoly. And they could not be traded by the private people or anyone else. वो सिर्फ वही trade करेंगे because they were the most profitable one. So this was the Carta system which they tried to create. Okay, that's why the Egyptian and Gujarat navies, they were against the Portuguese army. Okay, or the Portuguese navy. Then Francis de Almeida, he came up with blue water policy in which they were trying to master whole of Indian Ocean. Then comes one of the most famous person, Alfonso de Albuquerque. Okay, so he introduced this Carta system or the permit system, control over shipbuilding, captured Goa from the ruler of Bijapur, also captured Malacca and Ceylon, built fort at Calicut, and even did some social reforms like the abolition of sati. Okay, so you have to remember his name for prelims purpose. Who was the one within the Portuguese land? They were able to come up with social reforms. There were some other personalities also which were important for their contributions. Like when we have Nino da Cunha, he shifted the headquarters from Cochin to Goa, even acquired Diu Basin from Bahadur Shah of Gujarat. Okay. Then we have the important Portuguese settlement. On west coast we have Daman, Salsette and Bombay, and east coast we have Saint Thom in Madras and Hooghly. The gifts to India. What was the major contribution of the Portuguese? So this is all of us know, cultivation of tobacco, potato. So this comes from them only. Plus one of the important element of modernism, that is printing press. This was introduced by the Portuguese. Okay. But later on their political ambition were not that much successful. Why it did not become successful? That had certain reasons. Okay, so first of all, the various advantages which were there for the Portuguese, we'll discuss them along with the handout, they were outweighed by the Dutch. Better ships were made by the Dutch. Okay, and with the period of time, they lost all their territories in India, like lost Hooghly in 1631. Okay, then by 1661, there was a marriage alliance between Britain and Portuguese, in which the island of Bombay was given as a dowry की तरह दे दिया, and that island was transferred by Charles II to the British East India Company. ठीक है ना, for an annual payment of hardly 10 pounds. ठीक है, तो इतना रेंटल था उस टाइम पे, आज कितना है ना. Next we see the Marathas, they were able to capture Salsette and Basin from the Portuguese. So anyway, the political role or the political impact of the Portuguese on India is very limited. Their major contribution comes in terms of, first of all, the first direct route, which was, this was their contribution, introduction of some of the crops in the agriculture, okay, then introduction of printing press, some of the social reforms like abolition of sati. This is their main contribution, which we can see in terms of the outcome. So these are the various areas which were under their control, which were they tried to ensure, okay, but the coming of the Dutch, okay, that led to fall of their political ambition. These were the various methods. If UPSC asks you a 10-marker question, what were the various methods which were used by the Portuguese to monopolize the trade? Okay, so one was Carta system. This is very clear. The second system, this was the Kafila system. Kafila क्या होता है? Many ships, they go together and they have security, so that when the pirates come and attack, they can be easily guarded. So this system is known as Kafila system. This was also used by them. So whoever used to take their permit, the cartas, they were allowed to become part of the Kafila system. Security provide करते थे उसको. The third system is the blue water policy. For that, they wanted to have control over the shipbuilding. जितना ज़्यादा shipbuilding हमारे control में होगा, the more we can control the oceans. So this became the blue water policy. And finally comes the factory system, where they created various big warehouses, okay, so that produce can be taken from the Indian merchants, stored there, and eventually taken to the Europe. So these were the various methods which were used by the Portuguese to establish control. This can be a pertinent question. इसको question mark आपके handout में भी है ये topic, इसको mark करके रख लेना. ठीक है? We'll discuss it further also. Blue water policy means they were trying to get maximum control of the इंडियन ओशन कि इंडियन ओशन को हम कंट्रोल करेंगे. ठीक है, एंड फॉर दैट क्या क्या चाहिए आपको ब्लू वाटर पॉलिसी के अंदर? शिप बिल्डिंग आपके कंट्रोल में होना चाहिए. ठीक है, यू शुड हैव gunpowder or the armed trade should be there. So all these became elements of the blue water policy. Then comes the Dutch. Okay, so there is one very important thing about Dutch which you should understand. This was one of the most, you can say, modern type of company which was created. Okay, and why so? Because सबसे वर्ल्ड का ओल्डेस्ट स्टॉक मार्केट एक्सचेंज कहाँ पे है? एम्स्टरडेम. ओके, एम्स्टरडेम में है. तो वही एक ट्रेडिशन यहाँ पे मिलता है. द डच ईस्ट इंडिया कंपनी, फर्स्ट मल्टीनेशनल कॉर्पोरेशन टू इशू स्टॉक्स. Okay, so shareholding from the beginning itself, this was started by them. All right, so first factory they were able to open at Basawalipatnam 1605. Other areas included Pulicat, Kasim Bazar, Patna, Balasore, and even Surat. Then they were the one who were able to successfully dislodge the Portuguese from India's maritime trade. By 1623, they even replaced Portuguese from Indonesia. Okay, Indonesia or the Java and Sumatra island, those were eventually shifted by them. They lost their settlement to British. In 2-3 fights they were not able to sustain. Dutch even lost to one of the prominent ruler of South India, Martand Varma. Okay, उनको भी lost कर दिया Dutch ने. And finally comes the most important battle, that is the Battle of Chinsura in 1759. This was the battle in which Mir Jafar, all of you know about Mir Jafar. So Mir Jafar, he had colluded with the Dutch to fight to reduce the control of the British. So they were eventually defeated in 1759. So after that, the Dutch political ambition was also over. ठीक है. So brief history आपको याद रखनी है, बहुत ज़्यादा अंदर इसके अंदर डिटेल में जाने का जरूरत नहीं है. But still we'll see कि what were the factors which helped the Dutch to replace Portuguese in India. तो वो हम हैंड आउट के साथ में डिटेल में पढ़ेंगे. Let us see about British, the most important one for us, because they were the one who came as a trader. By the middle of the 18th century, they started flexing their muscles कि अब अपना मौका आ गया. All right. So the important battles, starting from the Carnatic Wars, then your Battle of Plassey, Battle of Buxar. These were the initial battles, and this, along with the help which was done by the downfall of the Mughals, the beating that was taken by the Marathas in the third Battle of Panipat. All those were indirect factors which were helpful for the British. Along with that, let us see. So if we see their initial headquarters on the east coast, it was at Madras, and to the west coast it was at Bombay, where it was given by the Charles II on lease. Okay, then the initial factory system was eventually fortified into Fort Williams at Calcutta. Farooq Chiar, he came up with one of the Farman in 1717, which became the Magna Carta for the British, because it was none other than from the Mughal emperor himself. Okay, so this was eventually used by them to establish offices at different places and to use it mostly, और the दस्तक, जितना भी दस्तक था उनको misuse start कर दिया था, because the फरमान came from Farooq Chiar. Whenever somebody gave concessions, those concessions were given by the emperor for your official trade, not for your private trade. Private trade could be done by these company people. Okay, this was a very big dichotomy with the British. इनकी कंपनी bankrupt होती थी, लेकिन जो people थे, they were becoming millionaires. ठीक है? This was one of the reason why they had to come up with the regulating act. और आप उसने उसमें one of the provision was that no receiving of gifts. Okay, उसमें एक provision डाला गया था. Why that was there? Because these various farmans which were issued by the empress were going to be misused. This was the reason which was responsible for the fight with the Siraj-ud-Dowla, one of the main reason for the friction, and the main reason for the battle of the Buxar, where the Mir Kazim is going to abolish all the दस्तक, भाई खत्म करते हैं, तुम और इंडिया वालों को बराबर कर देते हैं. But that was not acceptable, because by that time they were thinking we are the British, we are the embodiment of civilization. तुम लोग ने ऐसा कर कैसे दिया? Okay, so those complex issues were going to drawn up later on, but the misuse is going to start from of this Farman will start. Anyway, the brief history. In 1609, we see the coming of the captain William Hawkins, but he was not able to get a substantial outcome. Okay, so eventually it was the Sir Thomas Roe who was able to get the security for your Surat. Okay, because that was one of the initial settlement. By 1619, they established the factory at Agra, Ahmedabad, Baroda, and Bharuch, and by 1639, they were able to create fort at St. George. Okay, in Madras. Now, these are the personalities which you can remember. The first one was William Hawkins. He visited the court of Jahangir, And similarly, Thomas Roe, he also visited the court of Jahangir, and he was the one who was able to get protection for the Surat. Okay, what was happening when they were assigned? Surat में आपने पढ़ा होगा NCERT 1608 में settlement बनना start हो गया था, but that could not be completed because of the rivalry which was with the Portuguese as well as with the Dutch. So that's why they were able to create their settlement first at Masolipatnam and then finally at Surat. And for that they came for seeking security. कि जहाँ पर ना कुछ करो, we are not able to sustain because of the rivalry, because of the concessions that you have given to the other European companies. So this was the work of Thomas Roe. Then the Danes, they also made their company by 1616, established one of the settlement at Trankebar. This is in Tamil Nadu. In prelims, the word Sirampur you have to remember, okay, because this became the major center from where the religious conversions were done by the Danish. So they are also known by the terms Sirampur missionaries. Okay, so this was the area which was under the control of Danish, and they failed to strengthen themselves in political and economic terms, and that's why by 1845 सब कुछ बेच बाच के they went back to Europe. If this is not going to work, and this was given to British. Okay, Rishi, the local rulers did oppose when they were trying to build forts. Okay, but the problem was because of the naval superiority of the Portuguese, they were not able to stop them. So that's why concessions were given, and initially Indians were not at a losing level. Reason being, forts बन भी गया तो वो अपने ट्रेड को भी प्रमोट कर रहा था, तो indirect benefits were there. It was not a zero sum game, okay, for the Indian local rajas. So even though they were against the Portuguese, but at the same time the local trade, this did get a fillip or the boost because of their activities. The last to come, it was the French, okay, and the major role was played by one of the minister known as Colbert in 1664. Okay, by 1668 they were able to establish their factory at Surat again. 69 they were able to establish factory at Masolipatnam. 73 one of the first governors, they founded Pondicherry, and Pondicherry became the main base of the French. Okay, this became the main base. Then the French factories can be found at various areas: Mahe, Balasore, Kasim Bazar, Karaikal. And by 1742 we see the appointment of one of the finest general, that is Dupleix. Okay, we'll read about his policies, what were the failures of Dupleix. We'll also estimate him as a person, as a governor general, because he was the one who started meddling in the affairs of the political authorities in India. Okay, they could see easily कि Carnatic and as well as Hyderabad, they are the weak targets. So if we support our players, we will eventually get something back in the return. तो बस एक तरीके से आप ये लगा जुआ खेलने लग गए थे. So this was started by Dupleix. So that's why the idea of subsidiary alliance, it starts with him, but it will be perfected by the British, and the most important role was played by Lord Wellesley. ठीक है ना, तो वो हम बाद में पढ़ेंगे all those policies. This is the initial part where we discuss about these important companies and what were the outcomes. Okay, those outcomes we have to understand. ठीक है, so if you see in summary, these became the various European trading centers. ठीक है, वी आर गोइंग टू शेयर दिस पीपीटी, आपके पोर्टल में अपलोड हो जाएगी आज. ठीक है, कौन से वाली नहीं हुई, कोई, ठीक है, आज मैं करवाता हूँ, मेरे को एक बार भेजना. ठीक है, हाँ, तो ये वाली पीपीटी मैं ऑलरेडी उनको शेयर कर चुका हूँ, तो ही अपलोड. तो ये आप बेसिक याद रखना, दिस इज गोइंग टू बी वेरी यूजफुल फॉर योर प्रीलिम्स. ठीक है, दिस इज वन ऑफ द थीम फ्रॉम मॉडर्न इंडिया वेयर यूपीएससी इज आस्किंग क्वेश्चंस. तो इसको जरूर फैक्चुअल आपको याद रखना पड़ेगा, किस कोस्ट पे किसका कौन सा फैक्ट्री है, कम से कम जो मेन है वो तो याद रखना पड़ेगा आपको. ऑलराइट, इवन इफ वी लीव, पूरी डिटेल लिस्ट की जरूरत नहीं है, जो मेन उनकी इनिशियल सेटलमेंट्स है दैट यू हैव टू रिमेंबर. ऑलराइट, so first important thing about modern India is the arrival of various companies. We have discussed their motivation and we have even discussed their sequence. Okay, किस sequence में ये लोग आए. The second important part, it's about the overall rivalry of the Anglo and French. Now let me give you a brief overview of this rivalry between Britain and France. What were the factors responsible for it? If we see, the development of nation states in Europe. Okay, so one of the initial nation who were able to develop themselves into nation state were British and France or French. And both of them, okay, they were trying to create empires. Okay, they were trying to create empires. The whole 18th century, it is marked by the rivalry between British and France. Okay, this will be seen in Austrian War of Succession. This will be seen in the 7-Year War. Okay, this will be seen even in the American War of Independence, and then eventually the various coalitions which will be formed against the France after the revolution in 1789, and even the initial part of 19th century. In this we have the Napoleonic Wars. So even till 1815, when we have the Congress of Vienna, after Napoleon was defeated in the Battle of Leipzig in 1813 and then in the Battle of Waterloo. So till 1815, the rivalry between British and French, this is going to dominate the politics of Europe. Okay, and India became one of the theater of this rivalry. Kindly remember this perspective. Okay, whenever you're writing answers, the rivalry between Anglo and French, it was not just for creation of Empire of India. This was for all the empires in the world that they were trying to create. This could be seen in America, this could be seen in Europe, and this could be seen even in India. So the rivalry was the major crux. It was about the development of the strong nation states and the rival forces in British and French. Okay, so they are going to remain enemies, all right, till Napoleon was defeated. Okay, till Napoleon is defeated, they are going to stay as rivals. This you have to remember. Rest we'll discuss later on in the world history. But anyway, this major fight between British and France was because of this reason. When it comes to these Carnatic Wars, which were fought in India, 3 wars were fought. Okay, the first war was from 1746 to 48. This was mostly an extension of the Austrian War of Succession. The second war is most important for India because this was where we see the interference by Dupleix, and then the counter was done by Clive. Okay, the most famous is the siege of Arcot. Okay, more than 50 days the siege went, and that eventually changed the overall equation in India. We'll discuss about that also. And the last one was from 1756 to 63. Okay, so first and third, these were directly linked to European politics. In the first one, it was the Austrian War of Succession. In the third one, it was the 7-Year War, which was fought between these two countries worldwide. So India was just one of the theater for the same. When we see the second, this is where we see the fight between, or the dynastic succession was to happen in Carnatic as well as Hyderabad. And this is where we see the meddling by Dupleix and Clive. So the second Carnatic War is most important for the sake of Indian question, how they were getting involved in the Indian politics. And the third one is important from the perspective that French was defeated. And once French was defeated in the third Carnatic War, it was the British which was left behind as the only European power who could think about creating an empire in India. By 1757, they had already taken over the major revenue of the Bengal. Bengal के ऊपर focus करना शुरू कर दिया था उन्होंने by 1757 after Battle of Plassey. So these resources became very influential in the third Carnatic War. Okay, and in 1760, one of the famous Battle of Vendivash. This was fought between the British and the French, and in this the French got defeated. So the resources of the Bengal are going to help British. ठीक है, तो इसके ऊपर काफी सारे कमेंट्स हैं. We'll discuss those comments. We'll see the previous year questions also, because you have to learn how to understand these comments, and these comments are perspective based. Okay, like I tell you one of the comments that the victory over Bengal gave financial stick to British, and this stick was used by them to repeatedly beat French. So comments काफी अच्छे लगते हैं, and you have to include them in your answer writing. Okay, like similarly one of the famous comment is Dupleix made a cardinal blunder. Cardinal का मतलब समझते हो? A very big blunder for finding the key of India in Madras. Okay, Clive sought and found it in Bengal. So the importance of Bengal is very much there, and we have to understand these perspectives. जितने भी comments आएंगे किसी न किसी चीज के ऊपर आने वाले हैं. All right, like we have one of the famous historians, G.B. Malleson, है ना? He was a colonel at that point of time, and he has commented on Battle of Plassey. This was one of the most important battle in the history of India with very wide impact. Okay, so we'll have to understand these perspective. Like similarly, V.S. Smith, he gives a comment, okay, that neither Alexander the Great nor Napoleon could have created an empire in India by starting from Pondicherry as a base, okay, and fighting a power which has unbridled or unquestioned authority at the seas. Okay, so this was because the most successful navy, it belonged to British. That's why the word Royal Indian Navy eventually that it became. So these kinds of comments we have to understand. In 10 markers UPSC asks question from here. ठीक है. The second Carnatic War, यहाँ से question आता है because this was the time where the bitterness in the dynastic successions were easily played by Dupleix and Clive. So they can ask with some certain comments from these episodes. Okay, so you have to learn how to review a specific episode of a history along with the comment made by some of the historian or the contemporary opinions which can be found. ठीक है, in paper 2 this is very relevant. These comments you have to understand in other than the episodes, क्योंकि डायरेक्ट क्वेश्चन ऐसा नहीं आता है कि what describe Carnatic Wars, ऐसा क्वेश्चन नहीं आएगा आपके पास. The question will be a bit more analytical type, and there you have to use these various opinions. जैसा क्वेश्चन आता है उसी के हिसाब से हमें उसको चेंज करना है. So we'll try to apply this in the coming classes, but I hope this is clear to all of you. The first one is the arrival of the companies, and second the Anglo-French rivalry. Okay, now let us see with the handout. Take out your handout. So Ajinkya, this Austrian war of succession was being fought. कि कौन specifically ruler बनेगा of Austria, not Austin, Austria. Austrian war of succession. Okay, and both participated in this, British as well as French. They wanted their fellow to become the king of that area, and that's why the fight led to a war. Okay, so let us start with page number 1. Read page number 1, even though we have just discussed it. Rishi, handouts, they are more than enough for modern India, okay, for perspective development, but few context they can be better understood अगर आप बुक को एक रीडिंग कर सकते हो तो, okay, for plastic to partition. But if you are preparing for 23, then अभी पढ़ने का जरूरत नहीं है. उसमें मैं आपको मार्क करवा दूंगा कौन कौन से स्पेसिफिक एरियाज हैं जो आप पढ़ोगे तो यू आर गोइंग टू गेट बेटर आउटपुट, ठीक है, जहाँ से क्वेश्चन का स्कोप जो है वो ज़्यादा रहता है. देखो आजकल स्पेक्ट्रम का कुछ ऐसा मैग्निफिसेंट आउटपुट तो रहा नहीं है. जो क्वेश्चन आपके एनसीईआरटी से बन सकते हैं वो स्पेक्ट्रम से भी बन जाते हैं, जो आपके नहीं बनने होते वो ना एनसीईआरटी से बनते हैं ना स्पेक्ट्रम से बनते हैं. तो कुछ एडवांटेज आज सच रही नहीं है, तो आई विल टेल यू कि उसको आप छोड़ सकते हो, ठीक है. उससे बेटर अपनी ऑप्शनल की जो बुक्स हैं, BL ग्रोवर हो गया या शेखर बंदोपाध्याय हैं, उसको पढ़ लो, बिकॉज दे आर मेकिंग डिफिकल्ट क्वेश्चंस बाय यूजिंग दीज सोर्सेज रेदर देन द स्पेक्ट्रम. स्पेक्ट्रम हैज़ बिकम रिलेटिवली डिफंक्ट, ऐसा कुछ एडवांटेज नहीं रहा है उसको पढ़ने का. पहले वहाँ से स्पेक्ट्रम इज मोर लाइक कुंजी. कुंजी का कंसेप्ट समझते हो, 5-6 बुक्स को पकड़ा, वहाँ से फैक्ट्स निकाले और एक जगह टॉपिक वाइज डाल दिया. दिस इज द कंसेप्ट ऑफ स्पेक्ट्रम. अब यूपीएससी ने क्या करना शुरू किया, जानबूझ के वहाँ से हटा दिया है, बिकॉज वेन एवर अ मेजर सोर्स, ठीक है, वहाँ से क्वेश्चन ज़्यादा आते हैं तो सबको लगता है बस यही पढ़ लो बहुत है. उन्होंने वो कॉन्सेप्ट ही खत्म कर दिया. द नंबर ऑफ क्वेश्चन फ्रॉम मॉडर्न इंडिया दे हैव फर्दर रिड्यूस्ड. लास्ट ईयर तो 3-4 क्वेश्चन ही थे मुश्किल से, ठीक है. तो आप उस चीज़ को थोड़ा ध्यान में रखो कि आप पहले बेसिक लेवल मॉडर्न इंडिया कर लो, देन स्पेसिफिकली फ़ायदा तभी होगा आप ऑप्शनल वाला पार्ट ही और एनहांस कर लो रेदर देन गोइंग फॉर स्पेक्ट्रम. सिर्फ वही चीज़ स्पेक्ट्रम से पढ़ने की कोशिश करो जो कि और बुक्स में नहीं मिलती हैं ज़्यादा अच्छे से. लाइक सपोज एजुकेशन भी थोड़ा सा एक्स्ट्रा था, उन्होंने लिस्ट प्रोवाइड कर दी कांग्रेस के सेशंस की, हु वर द मेजर प्रेसिडेंट्स. तो वो जो फैक्चुअल डेटा है उसके लिए स्पेक्ट्रम रेफर कर लो, बट बेसिक्स के लिए मत करो, बैठ के परेशानी होगी उसमें. So let us see the first page. See the introduction. The 15th, 16th century in India marks the arrival of Europeans or the colonial powers in India. It is remarked that they came in search of gold, glory as well as gold. This can be your introduction if a question comes from here. Let us see the various factors why they came towards India. The first one is the political factor, where the Turks, they were able to take over Constantinople in 1453. Okay, and that's why in order to reduce the monopoly of these Arab intermediaries, they were trying to get a direct route from Europe to India. Second, the social factors, the role of Renaissance and the age of exploration. Because of this unique spirit of inquiry, we could see that they wanted to come towards India. Third, the economic factors. So if you see the map of Europe, Italy used to play a major role in the trade. Okay, that's why the Iberian Peninsula or the traders of Portuguese, they were always at a disadvantage. So what they wanted to create a direct route from that area. Okay, so that's why this was also one of the reasons why they wanted to challenge the trade monopoly of the merchants of Italy. And second, the demands of the oriental goods, like pepper was very much important, spices were required. Reason being, the consumption pattern of the European people was changing in the 15th and 16th century. The consumption of meat was increasing. कि अगर आपको meat ज़्यादा consume करना है, then you are going to require spices. Otherwise, digestion is going to get a lot of problem. So that's why the role of spices increased. Spices are also used as a preservation method also. So all those uses of the spices became prominent. That's why the demand for the oriental goods is going to increase during this time period. And technological advancement, like we have seen in the compass and cartography system, they became relatively better, as well as we see the shipbuilding technology. Shipbuilding technology also was becoming important during this time. And the final is the religious factor. You have to even remember the name of Pope Nicholas V. Okay, so he gave a bull. He gave a bull to Henry of Portugal, who was given the title of the navigator. Okay, somebody who is giving patronage to various kinds of mercenaries to go and find various distant land so that they can increase their influence. So we see that religious factor were also important, or at least providing the moral boost, है ना, कि by go and increase the sphere of Christianity. So these were the various factors which prompted them to make inroad towards India. यस पवन, यू कैन बुक के साथ में एक बार रीडिंग कर सकते हो इसको, ठीक है. अजिंक्य, ओरिएंटल मीन्स गुड फ्रॉम इंडिया. द वर्ड ओरिएंटल इज यूज्ड फॉर इंडिया. नाउ व्हाट वर द फैक्टर्स व्हाई द पोर्चुगीज बिकेम द फर्स्ट. तो उस पर आपको याद रखना है, वन इज द रोल ऑफ द पॉलिटिकल क्लास. So this can be seen from the Prince Henry of Portugal. He was determined. Okay, he was determined for this, and that's why he was given the nickname of the navigator. Second, religion. Okay, so religious patronage is also there. Go and promote Christianity. And the third one, some other factors which were responsible in India, like the Portuguese merchant. Once they went, they were given goods on credit. Okay. Some of these merchants they lacked finance, तो उनको credit पे थोड़ा सा goods देना शुरू कर दिया by the Indians. That's why it became easy for them to trade with India. So these were the factors which were eventually going to help Portuguese. Along with this, the various other important things would be the shipbuilding technology. In shipbuilding technology, Portuguese were the initial innovators. ठीक है? So those shipbuilding technology में भी वो innovation किया. And because of these factors, they became the first one to come towards India. Let us see the next important personalities. So read page number 2, Vasco da Gama and his impact. Let us see Vasco da Gama. So he was the first one to reach in 1498, and the help was given by Gujarati. Okay, he was Abdul Majid. So he was there. He helped from Cape of Good Hope till Cape of Good Hope. Even one of the previous traveler, he was Bartholomew Diaz. He was also able to come. But उससे आगे ही इनको प्रॉब्लम आती थी कि इंडिया किस तरफ चलेगा. Alright, so that was helped by this personality, Abdul Majid. Then he was able to come to India and eventually set up his own trading factory at Cananore by 1501. But his main specific demand that all the Arab merchants, they should be expelled from the territory of Zamarin, which was not accepted. Then eventually he became more aggressive and set a number of forts at Cochin and Quilon. Let us see the impact. First of all, they were able to realize that this hard work which they are doing from coming from Portuguese all the way up to India, कि 3-4 महीने लगा रहे हो इंडिया तक आने के लिए, this is profitable, है ना. अगर उनको लॉस हो रहा होता था, they would have come to India. क्या होता, डिस्कवरी नहीं हो जाके और परेशान कर, इतना दूर जाने का कोई फायदा नहीं है, ठीक है ना. दिस हैपेंस बिकॉज एवरीबडी गोज फॉर कॉस्ट एंड बेनिफिट, कि कॉस्ट बेनिफिट कितना है अपना, दैट इज इंपॉर्टेंट. प्रॉफिटेबल एंटरप्राइज अप टू 60 टाइम्स. Second, we see monopolistic practices. They were to be started by these Portuguese, which will become an eventually model for the later companies also. They'll also go for these monopolies. Okay, like the same was established by the British also later on, and they were able to do so with more fineness. They were the one that all the trade, it was monopolized by the British East India Company. And finally, colonialism. So this was the time where the classic colonialism is going to spread to various territories. So this is the beginning Okay, then we see Francisco de Almeida came by 1505, first viceroy of the Portuguese. Main mission was to bring the spice trade under the control of Portuguese, build various forts along the eastern coast of Africa as well as the western coast of India. They even strengthened the fortification in Cochin by creation of Fort Manuel. Manuel, he was the king. Okay, they were defeated at the Battle of Chol. Okay, by the various armies of Arabs as well as the Egyptians, but they were able to avenge it by 1509 in the Battle of Diu. Okay, and then the establishment of the blue water policy, which created naval supremacy for the Portuguese for a while, so that they could extend their frontiers all the way up the Indian Ocean. Then after him comes Alfonso de Albuquerque. So he is considered the real founder. Strategic control was created by him. Okay, and he served from 1509 to 1515. Strengthening of various categories of forts, capturing of Goa was also done by him. The Goa was important because of few factors. One, it is a natural harbor, which we can see. Okay, and this also strengthened his other ports in Indian subcontinent. And finally, the presence was felt now at even at the Gujarat seaport by having control over this area. Then we see the various modes which were used, which I have already discussed with you, like the Kata system. I think this is very clear to all of you. Second one is the Kafila system, where a large number of ships, they moved together and were provided security from the pirates. Third system, this is the blue water policy, which they were trying to strengthen their navy as well as control over the shipbuilding, so that maritime trade could be monopolized. And the fourth one is the factory system, where they could easily store the various produces and then eventually use it. Okay, let us see their relations with the native rulers, with the Vijayanagar, Dakkani Sultans, Mughals, and then finally with the southern rulers, including the Zamorin of Calicut. So read it quickly. So Pawan, जो ज़्यादा जरूरी है वो अभी इनिशियल पार्ट के लिए इट इज BL Grover. In BL Grover we read from the beginning chapters till 1857 and शेखर बंदोपाध्याय starts from 1857 majorly. Okay, वहीं के चैप्टर पढ़ते हैं. दोनों का मिक्स हमें करना पड़ेगा. टुमारो आई विल टेल यू इवेंचुअली कौन से बुक से क्या क्या पढ़ना है, सो दैट आपकी क्लैरिफिकेशन आ जाएगा. ओके, सो जिशन यू डोंट हैव टू रीड सेपरेटली. ओके, फॉर GS पेपर 1 ओनली फ्यू टॉपिक्स विच इज लाइक पेंटिंग्स, डांसेस एक्सेट्रा, बस वो पढ़ना है. Majority of the question in prelims in GS paper 1, they are coming from ancient and medieval, so that will be covered along with your foundation. Okay, global imperialism, Pawan, it means the age of imperialism. Imperialism का जो basic meaning है, it means creation of supremacy of metropolis. Metropolis means the mother country. So like these Portuguese, they were able to get control over Indonesia initially. They also tried to set up various stations in India. They were the one who were able to get control over Brazil. Spain went towards Latin America, Argentina, etc. All those were under the control of Spain. So this is the age of imperialism, where the initial colonial power, they were Spain and Portugal, but they were eventually replaced by British and French. Okay. So this is the age of imperialism which I have told you. So let us see the relation. First one with Dakkani Sultans and Vijayanagar. So they tried to maintain good relations in general. Okay. So Albuquerque, he was having contact with Krishna Deva Raya himself because they share the same time period. Okay. And the important role of Portuguese, since they were the one now who were supplying the good quality horses. So they were also responsible for maintaining balance between these two powers, depending upon who was having access to more number of horses. So this became the main role of the Portuguese. With the Mughals, as we see, they started creating commercial contact. Okay, Bengal from 1517. Even some of the missionaries like Rodolfo Acquaviva and Antonio Montserrat, they were also sent to the court of Akbar. If we say southern ruler, so initially they were having commercial and even the territorial empire building in the area, and eventually the conflict started when the Portuguese demand of expelling all the Arab merchants was not considered by the local rulers. Okay. Now, what were the major factors which were responsible for the decline of Portuguese? So we have to differentiate all these factors. Let us see. The first was the dishonest trade practices. Every native ruler was kind of fed up with their policies. Kata system लो, उसके बाद ये होगा, वो होगा. If they will not take this system, their ships will be eventually sunken in the ocean. So all those problems eventually did led to a kind of hostile attitude towards the Portuguese. So mainland पे हमारे all the time उनके ऊपर pressure increase होता रहा because of these activities. Second, the kind of monopoly which they were trying to create in the trade, this created animosity with the various other merchant classes. These merchant classes also tried to have a role in using these local natives against the Portuguese, because they were the one which were providing revenue to the state. So their plead would be listened by these various rajas. Then we see the political factors. So in Europe there was a Portuguese succession crisis of 1580, which resulted in breaking its trade monopoly in India. This was one of the major crises, and this adventure took part in Anglo-Spanish War. In India, if we see that the waging war with the British East India Company, they were defeated in 1612-14 and with the Dutch in 1625. Leakages in this monopoly system, because since they were not able to create unquestioned monopoly, the revenue or etc. which was going to the Portuguese, it remained limited. So economically वो उतना powerful नहीं बन पाए. Then we see the other factors like religious policies. Since they were focusing on conversion, they were considered as hostile by the local communities, because they always thought that the religion is always in danger because they are getting converted. Second, the discovery of Brazil, or the emphasis on Brazil eventually, so they shifted their focus more towards Brazil than towards India. And last, you can see proliferation of these sea routes and technology. So the knowledge of coming to India did not remain limited to the Portuguese. Eventually this became known to the Dutch, British and the French, and even the technologies were further innovated. Like the Dutch, they came up with one specific kind of ships known as fluid ship. Okay, so those ship technology were eventually improved by the Dutch, but the Portuguese, their technology remained stagnant in the coming years, because they were not having that rich a nation in comparison to the others. Alright, so these were the various factors which you should remember. It can be a 10-marker question. What were the factors responsible for the decline of Portuguese in India? Fluid ship आगे आएगा आपके handout में mention किया हुआ है, ठीक है? Let us see the impact and significance. So if we see the political impact of their coming, okay, so the experiment which was started by these Portuguese was eventually followed by the other powers, and this became a model for them. The second, emergence of Portuguese as a naval power, this increased their monopoly over trade. And third, they were the first one to sign these commercial treaties with the Indian rulers. This we see. Okay. In the social spheres, like we see some social reforms, like sati was abolished by Albuquerque in his dominion. Missionary activities, okay, so conversion of various Hindus as well as Muslims into Christianity was done. Patronage was given to various kind of painters, artists, sculptors. Okay, we see creation of the church architecture at this point of time. All right. Next, we see in economics, like introduction of various crops, tobacco, potato, tomato, cashew nut, like the main cultivation of cashew nut, specifically in the Goa region. This was mostly introduced by them. Coconut plantation, this was also increased by them in the Kerala region. So this production of cash crops eventually linked India's agricultural production with the market economy of the world. And finally, if we see technology, so they were the one who started the system of drilling groups of infantries on Spanish model. Okay, and finally the creation of multi-decked ships. Why multi-decked ships? Because large number of produce could be taken from India to Portuguese. Okay, so these shipbuilding technology were also an impact of the coming of the Portuguese. You can add the further points which are given in the PPT, like the introduction of printing press, that could be added here. Okay, they even introduced some kind of coinage within their different territories, so monetization of economy also happened. That you can add in the economics. Coins. Monetization of economy remains a priority for all the powers. So they were also issued that. Fort. Okay, the fort architecture, the building of various fort along the west coast. This also became a prominent part under them. Okay, read the next page, the Dutch, page number 6. इस इनिशियल टॉपिक के लिए हमें एज सच कोई भी बुक पढ़ने की जरूरत नहीं है. दिस हैंड आउट इज वेरी इलेबोरेट. ओके, द स्कोप ऑफ द क्वेश्चंस इट्स गोइंग टू बी मैक्सिमम फ्रॉम योर एंग्लो फ्रेंच राइवलरी दैट आई हैव ऑलरेडी टोल्ड यू. तो आप हैंड आउट पे पहले से ही लिख के रख लेना इनिशियल जितना भी हमारा हैंड आउट है. ठीक है, दिस इज मोस्टली फॉर द सेक ऑफ बैकग्राउंड रिव्यू और आपको प्रीलिम्स में ज़्यादा हेल्प करेगा. स्टार्टिंग फ्रॉम पेज नंबर 11, द स्ट्रगल फॉर सुप्रीमेसी, टिल द एंड 15. This is more important from questions point of view. So those details you have to by heart. Initially it's just about the basic understanding. ठीक है, वहाँ से आपके prelims वगैरह में क्वेश्चन ज़्यादा आने के चांसेस हैं, but in mains, in optional, it is very less. So far we have not seen even a single question from this topic. It's been 40 years, है ना, 35-40 साल हो चुके हैं ऑलरेडी पेपर को. यहाँ यूपीएससी ने क्वेश्चन नहीं पूछा है सच, द इनिशियल पार्ट. तो आप इसको रिवाइज जब करोगे तो लेस प्रायोरिटी दोगे इन कंपैरिजन टू दी अदर टॉपिक्स. ओके, दिस थिंग यू हैव टू रिमेंबर फ्रॉम द बिगिनिंग इटसेल्फ. जिस टॉपिक से ज़्यादा प्रायोरिटी क्वेश्चन आते हैं हमेशा वहाँ पे ज़्यादा एक्स्ट्रा एफर्ट डालना चाहिए, बिकॉज योर स्किल्स ऑफ अंडरस्टैंडिंग एंड नॉलेज ऑफ मॉडर्न इंडिया उन्हीं क्वेश्चंस के बेसिस पे इवेल्युएट होती है. इज इट क्लियर टू ऑल ऑफ यू? तो उस चीज़ पे हमेशा एक्स्ट्रा एफर्ट डालना चाहिए कि कहाँ से क्वेश्चन पूछा जाता है. Let us see the Dutch. Okay, so the Portuguese, they were not able to fulfill the demand of the European market for the spices. This became one of the emergent factor why the Dutch company was created. Okay, so the initial name was Dutch Company of Distant Lands. Okay, in 1594. Then we see the arrival of Dutch fleet of Jacob van Eyck to the Indonesia and how they were able to increase their profit. By 1602, we see the creation of the consolidation of various companies into one company, United East India Company or VOC, which came to known as Dutch East India Company. So this is how the company was created. The various settlements, activities and Dutch trade. Now let us see one after the other. Okay, so they were also given a charter by the Dutch king. Okay, and as per that they were able to wage war, sign treaties as well as hold foreign territory and construct forts in distant land. So this is what was allowed by the charter given to them. Strategic importance of India, this was understood by them because this was an area where there was commodities of exchange. Okay, commodities of exchange, because if spice used to come from East Indies or Indonesia, it used to get converted into clothes or textile. So that's why India was a hub of commodities of exchange. Okay, so that's why India was important for them. And finally, they were able to establish their factory at Masolipatnam 1605, Pulicat by 1610, then Surat, then Chinsura. These are the important places where they established their breweries. Then let us see their also relation with the native states. So if we see during the time of Jahangir, they were exempted from tolls. Tolls देने के लिए उनको exempt कर दिया था from Burhanpur to Cambay and Ahmedabad. Under Shahjahan, they also got issued firmans. That's why they were able to trade in Bengal as well as at Surat. Relation with Calicut. So in 1710, they were forced to sign the treaty of giving sole trading rights to the Dutch. Relation with Golconda. Okay, so they also got trade concession from there. So they have to pay only custom duty of 4%. And if we see from Tanjore, okay, there also they paid half of the toll in the all the part of this kingdom. Okay, so this is how various concessions were sought after by the Dutch. All right. Then we see the comparative advantage, why the Dutch were able to successfully challenge Portuguese. What were the factors behind that? See, the first factor, the business organization. So shareholder model was accepted by the Dutch and this became very prominent. Okay, and that's why the shareholders, they were mostly interested in the working of the company, how the company is working. The second, shipping technology. So they produced the fluid ship. Okay, they were the masterpiece of the Dutch and the design required less number of crew. Because if you want to take ship from place A to B, अगर आपको 50 लोग चाहिए और 50 people are manpower is required for carrying ship from one place to another, and if you reduce it by half, so आपको profit percentage, this is going to increase. So this fluid ship has this important operational cost were reduced by it. That's why it became better than the Portuguese ship, which were bulkier as well as slower. So speed was increased as well as the requirement of the crew that decreased because of this specific design. Religious policy. Dutch people, they were Protestant. Okay, they were Protestant. So they were not going to come to India with the main mission of converting people into Christianity. So that's why their religious policy was more liberal in nature and more acceptable to the native people. Then access to resources. So they were having access to gold resources from Africa, that also helped them in financing their operations. And finally, the extent of control and operation. So they were able to particularly master the area of Coromandel Coast to the Southeast Asian market. This became their major focus. इन्होंने इंडिया के ऊपर कम फोकस किया in comparison to Indonesia. Okay, because there was a specific, you can say, consensus between British and the Dutch. Okay, they were given the larger part of the spice trade, and the British, they got the larger part of the silk or the textile trade in India. That's why उन्होंने वहाँ पे ज़्यादा focus किया. Alright, let us see the decline. What was the decline of the Dutch? What were the factors responsible for it? The first is in the change in the trade profitability. So initially the spice trade was more lucrative. Okay, it was more lucrative, but with the period of time this became less profitable. That's why the British, उनका revenue ज़्यादा growth होने लग गया, and that of Dutch, it kept on decline with the period of time. Entry of other European powers. Okay, so this led to diversification of Asian commodities and made profits, and even the privileges were now available to all these companies. So Dutch did not remain the only beneficiary of the liberal concessional policies of the native rulers. So others were also given those concessions. Then the wars in India, in which they got defeated. Like you have to remember this battle, Battle of Kulachal in 1741, in which Raja Martand Varma, he defeated the Dutch. Okay, he defeated the Dutch in a battle. Okay, and this is an important battle, after which Dutch they were not able to recover. Okay, and they will be later on defeated by the British in the Battle of Chinsura in 1759. You can mention that also, that they got defeated by the native rulers like Martand Varma, and then by the British in 1759. Okay, in the Battle of Chinsura. So Rishi, shareholder. What is the meaning of a shareholder? क्या होता है shareholder? that if we make a company, it has 100% equity. This equity is divided into various shares, okay, and those who are the owners of these shares, they become the shareholders. So suppose somebody has 1% equity of a company, so they will become a shareholder of around 1%. So they have 1% stake. Okay, so since under the Dutch, they were able to create this equity model, they did not have to depend upon debt. Debt में क्या करना पड़ता है, आपको फिक्स्ड इंटरेस्ट देना पड़ता है. बट टू शेयर होल्डर्स द प्रॉफिट और द लॉसेस बोथ आर शेयर्ड. तो अगर लॉस हो रहा है तो आपको उनको पैसा देने की जरूरत नहीं है. But whenever there is going to be profit, then some dividends is going to be paid to these shareholders. So this model was favorable because इसमें आपके ऊपर economic burden कम रहता है. Is it clear to all of you? So this model was used by the Dutch. Because when you take loans, so आपको interest is fixed. You have to repay it. You have no further choice. Like suppose there are two methods through which you can finance your activities. You have 100% ownership, okay. There are two methods through which you can finance your operation. One, you can take a loan of, suppose you require 1 lakh rupees, okay, you require 1 lakh rupees. So if you go to any bank or you go to any trader, they're going to ask you for 12 to 15% of interest for business purpose. इतना interest आपसे charge करेंगे. So how much money are you required to give in 1 year? You have to give at least 1 lakh plus 12%. So 1,12,000 के आसपास आपका हो गया. This much is the money you have to repay. Okay. But suppose if I divest 1% of the ownership for 1 lakh rupees, do I have to pay back that person? No. In fact, they'll give me money and I'll only transfer the ownership. And when there is going to be profit, then dividend will be given to them as per their holding of the company. Okay. So this is the shareholding. When you buy some percentage or some stake in a company, that's how you become a shareholder. Shareholder mostly उन लोगों को बोलते हैं जिनका 1% से कम stake होता है. And those who have more than 1%, they are known as stakeholders. Shareholder versus stake. Stake मतलब larger stake है आपका company में. It could be by promoter. Promoter, they are initial people who are the owners of the company. They are known as promoters. ठीक है? So this is what it is all about. So this model was used by the Dutch. Through this, they were not required to give too much. They don't have to take money on loan. Loan पे लेने की जरूरत नहीं है. This is debt. This is equity. But after a time, equity becomes unsustainable. Why? 100% ही तो है. कितनी बार कंपनी बेचोगे? कितना स्टेक सेल कर सकते हो? That is always limited, and it depends upon the valuation of your company. ठीक है? आपका बिजनेस कितना है उसके हिसाब से ही आप कुछ स्टेक प्रोवाइड करोगे ना किसी को. लाइक इफ यू गो इन टूडेज, आजकल इंडिया में चल रहा है ना स्टार्टअप इंडिया, यूनिकॉर्न, किस बेसिस पे वैल्यूएशन होता है? डू हैव एनी आइडिया अबाउट इट? प्राइस ऑफ, आप एक प्राइस का शेयर कैसे निकालते हो एक कंपनी का? जो बेसिक फॉर्मूला है जो अभी तक चलता था बिजनेस में, ठीक है, इट इज ईदर ऑन द बेसिस ऑफ द रेवेन्यू दैट यू हैव एंड और ऑन द बेसिस ऑफ द प्रॉफिट. ठीक है, तो रफली क्या होता है, जितना आपका रेवेन्यू होता है उसको 3x कर दो, दैट इज द टोटल वर्थ ऑफ द कंपनी. ऐसे रफली कुछ मानते हैं. इन टर्म्स ऑफ प्रॉफिट इसको इट कैन गो इवन अप टू 10 टाइम्स बिकॉज प्रॉफिट कम होगा. ओके, अगर आपका रेवेन्यू सपोज 2 to 5 CR है, 5 CR मान लेते हैं जस्ट फॉर द सेक, तो आपका जो ओवरऑल कंपनी का वैल्यूएशन है वो कितना हो गया? 3 to 5 टाइम्स. तो 3 टाइम्स हुआ तो अराउंड 45 CR के 15 के आसपास आपका रेवेन्यू हो गया. प्रॉफिट अगर आपका सपोज आउट ऑफ 5 CR योर प्रॉफिट इज 1, तो कितना वैल्यूएशन हो गया आपका? रफली 10 मल्टीप्लाई बाय 1. इसको फिर डिवाइड करोगे आप शेयर्स के बेसिस पे. ओके, सो फर्स्ट देयर इज वैल्यूएशन एंड देन ऑन द बेसिस ऑफ इट दे डिवाइडेड इनटू शेयर्स. बट इन इंडिया करंटली ये प्रैक्टिस कुछ अलग ही हो चुकी है. दे आर नाउ कमिंग अप विद वेरियस काइंड्स ऑफ वैल्यूएशन जो कि सस्टेनेबल ही नहीं है. You must have seen the big startups, how they are into losses and still they have very large valuations. है ना, the big startups like Flipkart you see, Zomato, है ना, Byju's हो गया. These are the big startups in Indian landscape. But उनका वैल्यूएशन पता नहीं किस लेवल पे कर रहे हैं। टेक्नोलॉजी वाले में सिर्फ आइडिया के बेसिस पे वैल्यूएशन चल रहा है, इवन दो दे आर नॉट एबल टू क्रिएट द रियल बिजनेस। रियल बिजनेस क्या होता है? प्रॉफिट। रियल बिजनेस इज नॉट इवन रेवेन्यू। सपोज यू आर बर्निंग 1000 crores फॉर क्रिएशन ऑफ द रेवेन्यू ऑफ 500 CR, तो ये क्योंकि फायदे का सौदा है क्या? ठीक है, दिस इज नॉट बिजनेस। बिजनेस मीन्स देयर शुड बी प्रॉफिट। बट आज की डेट में इन इंडिया वैल्यूएशन इज entirely different, and this is because of the development of these startup का ecosystem बन चुका है। तो what we have VCs, you understand the term VC? These are venture capitalists. They are the one who eventually help people in getting the funding. Initial funding खुद provide करते हैं, but then they take you to the various institutions. So वो सारा पार्ट अब चेंज हो चुका है। बट बेसिक लेवल पे कभी समझना हो कि शेयर कैसे डिवाइड होता है आपके वैल्यूएशन, then it is divided into the number of share that you want to divide it into. ठीक है, and then you can sell a specific part of equity or the shares to someone for money. ठीक है, यस नॉर्मली क्या होता है कि कंपनी ने ऐसा स्टेक सेल कर दिया। ठीक है, कंपनी कैन बी प्राइवेट लिमिटेड और इट कुड बी पब्लिक लिमिटेड। पब्लिक लिमिटेड इट मीन्स इट इज लिस्टेड ऑन द एक्सचेंज। ठीक है ना, लिस्टेड है और उनके जो शेयर्स की एक स्पेसिफिक डायरेक्शंस हैं फ्रॉम सेबी दैट यू हैव टू फॉलो, that if you are a public listed company at least 25% of the equity this should be taken over by the other people, it cannot stay with the promoter। तो वो सारी डायरेक्शंस आपके ऊपर एडिशनल लगने लग जाती हैं along with that। anyway चलो इकोनॉमिक्स नहीं पढ़ना हमने, let's come back to the Dutch। see the decline, change in trade profitability, this was one of the reason। okay, the share of textile and raw silk increased from 16% of total import into Europe at the beginning of 17th century to 55% of total import। so naturally फायदा किसको हुआ? British। okay, because they were the one who were able to get more output from there। then entry of various other European powers, then the wars which we have just discussed, the battle of Kolachal, then you can also add the battle of Chinsura। okay, and then finally the politics at home, the post the glorious revolution they signed multiple agreements, according to Dutch was given the more profitable spice trade whereas the English took the textile। however the beginning of the next century the textile became more profitable। ठीक है, so these were the factors which were responsible for the decline of the trade। come to next page, the British। so बहुत ही ब्रीफ में दिया हुआ है अबाउट ब्रिटिश, बिकॉज इवेंचुअली हमें इसके बारे में बहुत सारा डिटेल में पढ़ना पड़ेगा। तभी तो सिर्फ एक बेसिक आपको एक 1 पेजर दिया गया है कि इनिशियली क्या क्या रिलेटेड था विद द ब्रिटिश। जस्ट रीड पेज नंबर 8 देन विल डिस्कस इट। Let us say the British. So the company was found by the end of 1599. By December 1600, it was given a royal charter, and under this royal charter, they were given the exclusive privileges of trading with the areas east of the Cape of Good Hope for the initial 15 years. चार्टर का मतलब क्या है? एक स्टेटमेंट की तरह हो गया, ठीक है. चार्टर इज समथिंग, द टर्म्स एंड कंडीशंस which were given by the royal house, or in this case by the queen, that you have to abide by these terms and condition. We are providing you monopoly over trade, and you could take all these action on the behalf of the royal house. This is how they used to give the charter. This is just a kind of sanctity which was created. ठीक है, कि legally आपको एक backing मिल गया, that you are not doing or pursuing something without the active interest of the royal charter or the royal house. So this is a kind of कि बस हमारी कंपनी है, और उसको एक स्टैंडिंग मिल जाता था कि भाई they can now negotiate the commercial treaties with the Indian patrons. Okay, so this was the backing which was providing through these charters. So this was the initial charter. As we have already seen, Sir Thomas Roe, okay, he was sent in 1615, and then he was able to get the Farman. Then the confrontation eventually led to the victory of the British in 1620. They also got the Farmans from the Sultan of Golconda. The English were allowed to trade in the ports of this with just an annual payment of 500 pagodas, which was the local currency. And then they got the Bombay by 1662, as it was given in dowry, and they have to just pay the annual payment of £10. Okay. Then we see the various relation with the native rulers, like relation with Mughals. So in 1686, they thought that we have sufficient power to challenge the Mughals, but they were mostly defeated by the Aurangzeb, and they had to pay a compensation of 1,50,000, okay, for the whatever was the loss during the war. And then in 1717, they were given the most important imperial Farman, through which privileges were given, and this is known as the Magna Carta. With the Marathas, initially they tried to create a friendly relation. Okay, this was important because Marathas were used by them when they were fighting with the Mysore. Okay, and once Mysore it was weakened, eventually Marathas were also defeated. Okay, see the initial factories. So first workable factory, it was at Masolipatnam 1611. Then they created at Surat. Then various other areas like Madras, Bombay, and Calcutta. Let us come to the last company, the French. Just read page number 9 and 10, which covers the various French factories, the relation with the natives, and the reasons why they wanted to create a territorial empire for themselves. Okay, because if we see the case of Portuguese or the Dutch, their territorial empire, how they are going to create, it was not that much clear. They did not participate in the political equations. Okay, even though they fought with the major powers, it was not with the objective of creating any sort of empire. But when it comes to France, there was a design, but this design failed because of the fight that they had with the British. So यहाँ पे हमें इसलिए factors को जानना है, why they also wanted to create an empire in India, and that is very easy to comprehend also. Why do you want to create an empire? Because so that you can enjoy the wealth of that nation. It can lead to further development of your home country. Okay, whatever taxes that you are paying, वो आपको pay नहीं करना पड़ेगा, because taxes are imposed by the political powers. If you or yourself are the political power, तो कोई tax pay करने का जरूरत है? No, it is not required unless it gets converted into a democracy. कि president के ऊपर भी tax लगेगा. But on king there was no such taxation. Alright, so these were the various objectives, motives with which they wanted to create a territorial empire in India. Anyway, just read the areas where they tried to create factories and the relation with the natives. समझ में आ रहा है ना? Because initially आपको बस basic understanding समझनी. कल से हम start करेंगे the important part. Today is just the basic introduction of the topic, which were the 4 companies, क्या factor थे for their coming, why the Portuguese and the Dutch got defeated. These are the basic parts. The specific part where we have to dig a bit deeper, these are the Carnatic Wars. There we have to bring in the historiography also, because without historiography हम अच्छा आंसर नहीं लिख पाएंगे. So we'll discuss all those statements tomorrow on those specific topics. टेस्ट ऑलरेडी ऑनलाइन आपको डल चुके हैं ना, इसमें पहले 2 टेस्ट आप धीरे से बात करके डाउनलोड कर लेना आज, ठीक है. Those of you are part of USP, there are some sessions which we are going to conduct tomorrow and day after tomorrow. मतलब वेडनेसडे और फ्राइडे को करेंगे स्पेसिफिकली. तो आप ऑफलाइन में भी अगर आना चाहें तो मेरे ख्याल से ग्रुप देखा था आपने, टेलीग्राम पे ग्रुप चेक कर लेना. देयर 2 लाइव सेशंस स्पेसिफिकली फॉर दोस 2 पार्ट्स. एक तो आप जैसे आप प्रीलिम्स के क्वेश्चन सॉल्व करते हो तो यू आर नॉट एबल टू अंडरस्टैंड कौन सा करना चाहिए कौन सा छोड़ना चाहिए, वो दोज थिंग्स, ओके, हाउ टू डू ऑल दोज पार्ट्स रिलेटेड टू प्रीलिम्स, तो वो हम डिस्कस करेंगे on Wednesday and Friday, 6 p.m. So let us see French. The most influential minister which was responsible for the creation of this company, it was Colbert, okay, and he followed the path of mercantilism. What is the meaning of mercantilism? This was an economic system which was in vogue, which was in fashion before capitalism. So this system was known as mercantilism. In mercantilism, the major objective used to be accumulation of money, okay, or accumulation of bullion. But how was this possible? How was the favorable balance of trade was possible? This is going to happen when you have control over political power. Okay, so the answer for mercantilism or the major understanding would be use of political power for the accumulation of bullion. This system became mercantilism, and this mercantilism, it was not the working of the market forces, okay, because the taxes etc. they were imposed by the political system. Once you have control of political system, do you think you are going to play the market rules? No, that will become a level playing field. You are going to use this advantage for your own benefit. That's why this mercantilism system will be later criticized by Adam Smith, who is considered as the father of the modern economic system. He came up with his famous book, The Wealth of Nations, which says that there should be capitalism or the policy of laissez-faire, that state should not intervene in the economic policies. There should be the direct role of demand and supply. So this mercantilism was the initial system where they wanted profit in terms of accumulation of wealth through the use of political power. So this became the mercantilist policies. Okay. This will further discuss when we will discuss the pattern of economic exploitation of India. Okay. There are 3 different stages of economic exploitation of India. The first stage is known as mercantilism. Then comes the stage of वन वे फ्री ट्रेड, है ना, फाइनेंस कैपिटलिज्म. तो वो सारे हम बाद में पढ़ेंगे व्हेन वी विल डिस्कस द पॉलिसीज ऑफ द ब्रिटिश. सो दिस वर्ड इज अगेन गोइंग टू कम, मर्केंटिलिज्म, एट दैट पॉइंट ऑफ टाइम आल्सो. Okay, so France also was on the path of mercantilism. With this, we see the French factories, they were set up at Surat, then at Pondicherry. Okay, Chandranagar was again one of the areas in Bengal where they were able to manage. By 1721, they also had control over Mauritius. 1720, they were reorganized as Perpetual Company of the Indies, and they were also able to increase their post in Malabar and Karaikal by the end of the 1739. If we see their relations, so initially, okay, they had to face the wrath of Shivaji, and eventually they acknowledged the authority of Shivaji and paid in money for the various trading activities done in his area. Second, we see the relation with the Mughals. So they were able to get a Farman in 1667 and able to open a company further on. In 1688, the area of Chandranagar, okay, this was given by Aurangzeb. And if we see for southern rulers, so they were the one who were able to interfere in the southern politics, and the most important being Carnatic and Hyderabad. Both were influenced by the role of duplex, okay, which we will discuss tomorrow. See the reasons to set up territorial empire. The first one, the role of the mercantilist ideas. This was the major aim. We want to have as much favorable balance of trade as possible, or the accumulation of wealth, and this was the core philosophy. Okay, so what they used to think, see the various important features of mercantilist ideas. The volume of the world trade, it is limited, therefore state must ensure the maximum share for itself. And how is that going to happen? By having political control over distant lands. जितना ज़्यादा area आपके under control होगा, you can influence the trade accordingly. Second, the gold and silver are the most important wealth of nations, so that's why the accumulation of the bullion or the wealth. Third, the value of export should always exceed the value of import to get a favorable balance of trade. And for that, what was required? The use of the tariffs. Okay. And last one, the colonies can provide raw material as well as become market for the manufactured goods. That's why they wanted to have control over the distant land. All these became the basic part of mercantilism. In short, it is the use of political power for the accumulation of wealth or bullion. Okay. And so these were the major factors why they wanted to create a territorial empire in India. And the most important factor, the 18th century. The 18th century, it was marked by the decline of Mughals. So a political vacuum was getting created, and this political vacuum could be seen in Deccan. This vacuum could even be seen in the Bengal region. Okay, and it was up to the important personalities who could identify कि कहाँ अच्छी opportunity है. So Dupleix, he went towards Deccan, and Clive went towards Bengal. And eventually the policies of Robert Clive became more successful, and he is considered as the father of the British Empire in India because of the initial activities. But we'll take all these statements with critical analysis tomorrow. Reason being, we have to understand each and every minute part of this. Most importantly, the policies of the British, why they wanted to have control over the trade. Okay, we'll discuss tomorrow ki how majority of the import of the British, it was from Bengal region. More than 50% of what they used to import, it used to come from Bengal. So Bengal became the natural magnet. कि जाना है तो यहाँ पे जाना है. पैसा कहाँ से बचेगा? You always go for the volume. Okay, so that's why it was important for them to look towards Bengal, because this is the area where maximum finance was getting leaked. वहीं पे सबसे ज़्यादा पैसा उनको invest करना पड़ता था for trading purposes. Okay, so that's why the Bengal will become the epicenter of creation of empire in India. Whoever is going to control Bengal will eventually become the king of India. This is what was the basic solution. Okay, उसको आप use कर सकते हो so that this bullion which is coming towards India, as all of you know, in the 18th century, India was enjoying this favorable balance of trade. We had discussed in medieval India that by the end of the 17th century, India's commerce was the commerce of the world. This was the major statement of Peter the Great. Okay, so it means Indian GDP was influential on the world. So in order to extract wealth from India, they had to resort to the policies of mercantilism, and eventually the political domination. And this political domination, the initial fight will start from the Carnatic, and then eventually the follow-up will be in Bengal. And with the period of time, once they were able to capture Bengal through the battles of Plassey and then subsequently of Buxar, it became easy for them because finance आ चुका था. Now what they wanted to have a well-trained army. Okay, because finance is secured. Now what you want? Well-trained army. And one thing was very important for the British. We have to make sure that a native alliance is not created against them. Okay, because naturally these people were having more in common than with the British. So British knew this thing. That's why initially they did not fight the wars and battle openly. They were mostly defensive battles. Okay, to protect their self-interest rather than for going for the aggrandizement कि हमें आज empire आज ही बनाना है, आज ही शुरू करते हैं. ठीक है, that was not their policy. This policy shift is going to start from the end of the 18th century with the coming of the Lord Wellesley, who will say कि भाई अब हमें empire create करना है. And this is going to reach the heights under Lord Dalhousie. Dalhousie was a person of different mindset. Initially the policy was only those native states should be annexed which cannot be left out because of some important strategic reason, कि हमें उसकी requirement है. This will be changed to all those should be annexed which could not be left out because of some reason. ठीक है ना? तो this shift is going to come under Lord Dalhousie. Okay. So for the British, starting from 1750s, initially we see these Carnatic Wars. Okay, the most important Carnatic War will be the second Carnatic War. This is where the Indian issue became more prominent. Then the victory in 1757, the Battle of Plassey, we'll discuss that in detail. Then how they were able to defeat the French in the Battle of Vendivash. Even before that, in 1759, like we have just discussed, Battle of Chinsura, in which the Dutch were also defeated. Then comes the most important masterstroke, the Battle of Buxar, 1764. They were also held in between by the fall of Marathas in the third Battle of Panipat. Okay, even though British did not play any major role in that, okay, they were just bystanders. But the fall of Marathas, it was the relative increase of British. Okay, so it is often said we'll also review the third Battle of Panipat in tomorrow. कि क्या उसके major outcomes थे for the British, because now the focus is on the modern elements. All right, and later on we'll see with the period of time that from 1765 onwards, the famous Treaty of Allahabad, and through this Treaty of Allahabad they were able to get Diwani as well as Nijamat rights. Okay, those rights were given to them. For few years they did not change the administrative system. All right, and this system remained more or less same. This administrative system will eventually be changed from 1773. The coming of the Governor General, the first one would be Warren Hastings. Okay, so all those parts we are going to discuss, but brick by brick, थोड़ा थोड़ा करके सबको discuss करेंगे. It will take many classes to cover the initial part. All right, today is more of about the introductory part, the first topic which we have been able to finish, the arrival of the European companies. Tomorrow, initially we'll discuss about these Carnatic Wars, and then we'll further go into the other native states of India. Okay? So that's it for today. Kindly bring in your handout number 1 tomorrow. भूलना मत इसको. Right? Tariff means duty. Okay? Custom duty जैसे हम लगाते हैं, it's nothing but tariff, economic term. Okay, on the online students, tomorrow the class will be on the portal. Okay, so those of you who have taken new admissions, kindly get the links. All right, so from tomorrow onwards, we'll have it on the portal itself, not on YouTube.